this evening is really a continuation of our discussion last Friday, at which time I engaged primarily in the recounting of personal reminiscences of Mr. Hall and of my connection with the Philosophical Research Society throughout those years. It was my intention, and still is, that tonight we might primarily devote ourselves to what might be called the heritage in terms of ideas and spiritual insights of Mr. Hall, which certainly is a great deal of interesting material, but which is really a subject much more difficult to deal with. So you will have to perhaps at certain points forgive me for mingling my personal philosophical views with those of Mr. Hall, but I will try to distinguish them whenever possible. And let's put it that way, I don't think that there ever was or still is any kind of a serious disagreement between Mr. Hall's views and my own, so that they are certainly not very far from each other. Now, to begin with, maybe I will sort of very, very briefly enumerate some of the points that we made last time, so that those who were not here will be up to date. I spoke of my initial visit to Philosophical Research Society about 1952, when Mr. Hall was not in the office, and my subsequent return there eventually upon moving to Los Angeles, my much more frequent contact with PRS and also with Mr. Hall. And then in 1970 he and his then Vice President Dr. Henry Drake asked me to become the second permanent lecturer at the Society, namely the one addition to Mr. Hall, and from then on, clear through Mr. Hall's demise and beyond, I fulfilled that particular role, which I considered to be a very marvelous opportunity and a great honor. But I would say the greatest opportunity of all was to have discovered Manly Palmer Hall, who immediately upon first contact and continuing through all the years was, in my eyes, an utterly otherworldly figure, in the sense that he was probably the greatest orator on earth, and one of the most prolific and insightful writers within the philosophical and spiritual field also, in addition to many other great qualities. So once again I will go and give testimony to the fact that I felt singularly blessed to have met this man and to have been able to render him some service. And I would say my acquaintance with him and his work was undoubtedly one of the most important and most enjoyable activities that I engaged in. And now as we are moving over a little further to trying to discern what we might call his heritage, we need to call to mind again, because this is a key factor, that while still in his upper 20s, he wrote a beautiful and gigantic book, of which the 50th anniversary edition is here for you to take a look at, which is now generally known as The Secret of All Ages, but which has also a longer title, which I will use. And once in a more private setting, Mr. Hall said, I don't know exactly prompted by what, comment by whom, that he said that was the most important thing that he ever wrote, and that it since then, since its publication, before his 30th year, was the source of everything else that he did after that. He said all the books that I have wrote were written on about paragraphs and chapters of that book. He said it's all there, and we always reverently refer to it as the big book, which of course it is in many respects. Now, that being the case, let me progress a little bit here. And we will probably be well rewarded if we base our evaluation of his possible spiritual and philosophical heritage on the primary message and structure of that book. And so I thought that what we may do is go through the principal summaries in our own words of the subject matter of that book as Mr. Hall had written it, and by taking advantage of those titles, possibly be able to cobble together something that, with a little stretch of the imagination, which one always needs, it might be called Manly Hall's psychospiritual heritage. He was 27 years old, by the way, when he published what the book, one of the titles of which was an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy. And there was yet another little subtitle, being an interpretation of the secret teachings concealed within the rituals, allegories and mysteries of all ages. And so in order to perhaps try to summarize to some extent what philosophical and mystical orientation and insights he left behind, it might be useful for us if we take these principal categories which he mentioned in the title of the book already and try to expound on them by obviously bringing into the picture his point of view and his contribution. By the way, it should never be forgotten that by the time he left us, he had written over, I don't know how many over, but over 150 books, and had delivered over 7,600 lectures. So let's say if we were to digest and analyze all of those, then I think we would be here for an exceedingly long period of time, but we are not quite going to do that. In any event, so right now let's look at these headings that he has in the title of his book, and perhaps by looking at these as individual subject matters, we might find a number of trajectories leading to the center, so to say, of Mr. Hall's insight and Mr. Hall's thinking. And so the first of these, interestingly enough, and I have some vague notion as to why he used these titles, which are mentioned in a minute, in it that he said Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy. Now, why should he have used these titles? The question in some of your minds, owing to my general orientation and owing to many of the things that go on in our meetings here, you might ask, why didn't he mention Gnostic? Well, he didn't mention Gnostic in the title of that book because at the time he wrote the book, there was virtually nothing known about Gnosticism. It wasn't until a good deal later, 1977, well, maybe a little bit earlier, with the publication of the translation of the Nag Hammadi find of biblical archaeology and the subsequent exegetical literature led by Professor Elim Pegel's splendid book, The Gnostic Gospels, that people began to discover or rediscover it, that there was such a thing as Gnosticism, because of the great pillars of the esoteric, what now we often call the esoteric tradition, which is of course also the field of Mr. Hall's interest. There we knew the name, and we knew a few rather hostile reviews of the teachings of the ancient Gnostics, as they came from the people who are called often the heresiological or church fathers who were writing against heresies. And as I was wont to say earlier on, where the now happily deceased Soviet Union was still in existence, that to derive information about the Gnostics from these old sainted rascals, the heresiological church fathers, people like Irenaeus and Epiphanius and others, it was just like trying to derive accurate information about the United States from Pravda or Izvestia, the two happily deceased Soviet major newspapers, which wore such deceptive titles as in Pravda means, I think, truth. It couldn't be a more mendacious title in that instance, you know, but that's how these things are. In any event, that being the case, there was, Mr. Hall himself wrote at a certain point prior to the publication and subsequent exegesis of the Nag Hammadi writings, that owing to this circumstance, Gnosticism was really only of historical interest for all the centuries and centuries and centuries. That being the accounts that yes, there were such people, and they taught and wrote some really weird stuff, to use that term, and then they just went out of business. That's what all people knew. Of course, there were some of us who, in some curious ways, were privy to more secret and more private transmissions and information, who knew a little bit more, but we were few and in between, and for good reasons like the Holy Inquisition, we tended to keep our mouth shut. You know. So that being the case, Mr. Hall obviously selected, and he said so at times too, he selected a number of philosophical and mystical associations and schools which are active and are active at the present time and were active when he wrote the big book. So he referred to existing sources to which people could refer when reading his book and thereby getting more elaborate information. And that's why he used these particular titles. But I think that they are important enough and indeed insightful enough schools of thought that he mentioned, that if we use these now in order to let's say, speak of his heritage, we are probably pretty much on the right track. So here we are, Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy. Now then, I'll use them in the same sequence in which Mr. Hall used them, and I'll start with a subject that throughout history has been very often controversial, but to which I am also partial for reasons of my own, namely Masonry or Freemasonry. So here I think probably the best introduction to Mr. Hall's dealing with that subject is a passage that he wrote himself in a book called The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, just a paragraph, and I'll read that to you. Masonry is a structure built upon experience. Each stone is a sequential step in the unfolding of intelligence. The shrines of Masonry are ornamented by the jewels of 1,000 ages. Its rituals ring with the words of enlightened seers and illumined sages. 100 religions have brought their gifts of wisdom to its altar. Arts and sciences unnumbered have contributed to its symbolism. It is more than a faith. It is a path of certainty. It is more than a belief. It is a fact. Masonry is a university teaching the liberal arts and sciences of the soul to all who will attend to its words. Masonry is in truth the long-lost thing which all peoples have sought in all ages. Well, a more intense and elaborate paean of praise, I think, would be difficult to design. And coming from one of the most forthright and honest of people, I think it is of particularly great importance. Now, in what way can we derive, let us say, a somewhat similar insight and inspiration from this particular branch of esoterica as Mr. Hall has derived? It's not very easy because, first of all, we are dealing with what officially is called a secret organization. And how are you going to know all about something that's secret? I would say it's probably a little bit difficult. In any event, I think these are some of the issues that are probably of greatest importance and that we might incorporate into the mandala of the great branches of the esoteric wisdom that Mr. Hall referred to. First of all, Freemasonry is an initiatory body. What does that mean? It means that it functions on the basis of a step-by-step initiatic progression of the soul, or as it is now called psychologically, the psyche. in other words, if the psyche, if the soul, the mind, whatever you want to call it, is to come into its own, if it is to transform into what it was supposed to be and become the insightful, the transformed, and the transforming agency of our lives, then there must be a process that we undergo, and that this process is by its nature initiatic or gradual. What does gradual mean? Gradual means a step, going up a step, grades, you see. So, and this is a universal human condition. And so here and there in history, certainly in the ancient times, and let's say in the Alexandrian period, the first 400-500 years after Christ or so forth, it was recognized by quite a large number of people in the ancient world, Greece, Rome, Egypt, the Mediterranean area and beyond, that such a gradual initiatic gaining of profound transformative insight in the soul is possible for humans. It is on this proposition that what were called the mysteries, and please don't ever say mystery schools, because to me that is a derogatory expression. The mysteries were not little red schoolhouses in the prairie of Greece or something like that, but they were, let us say, spiritual laboratories of insight and of transformation. And as such, they were all of an initiatic nature. There were a good many of them. The likelihood is, as we will indicate in a few minutes in connection primarily with Hermeticism, that they were of, at least in terms of their operating procedure, not necessarily their mythologies, but their operating procedure, they were based on the proposition that indeed people can be led, if they are desirous and if they really consider this to be an important task of their lives, they can be led step by step to an ever more effective and more intense contact with the deepest portion of their own nature, and perhaps by way of that deepest portion also with the deeper aspects and possible disclosures of universal being. And the acquisition of such insight and such knowledge is of a nature that changes the human psyche. Now you might say that how do we know that that is true, except some accounts of ancient people who were very laudatory of the mysteries. Even such a prosaic lawyer and politician as Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great orator, had said that the greatest ennobling force in life was the transformation that people underwent at the hand of the Eleusinian mysteries. He particularly referred, because they were the most famous and the most popular. And so, they were universally respected, and the people who were really desirous of undergoing that kind of experience went there and underwent it personally. So what were we dealing with here? We were dealing with procedures that had been worked out, you might say, over a very long period of time. In some cases, like the Eleusinian mysteries, for several thousand years, and if we can count into it the mysteries of Egypt and so then even longer, they were worked out in such a way that as the result of a combination of instruction and induced interior experience, people would undergo substantial changes. I know one of the features, one of many, I'm sure, that was referred to frequently by people in general. It said that people who were initiates of the Eleusinian, the greater mysteries of Eleusis, had all completely lost their fear of death. Now, you know, anybody who can pull that off, shall we say in colloquial terms, has really got something, you know. I dearly wish that the Eleusinian mysteries could have been brought back over the last few years when everybody is just, oh, COVID, you know. In other words, the fear of death, shall we say, was very evident. It would have been nice if it had been less evident. In any event, these, just to mention the basic elements which I'm sure many of you are aware of, that every one of the mysteries, Eleusinian mystery, Orphic mysteries, mysteries of Dionysus, mysteries of Isis and Osiris, all of these, they were based on a story, on a myth, and this myth was then studied and internalized in such a way that the initiates themselves became protagonists in the myth and underwent symbolically the same kind of big spiritual experiences, transformative situations that the figure in the myth went through. So, you know, there are a lot of good books on the mysteries to be informed of that. There is really no great doubt about their nature, although they all had some procedures at the center of their system which were secret, and the secrets were kept. The people never revealed, or the thousands of people who went through the years, for instance, through the Eleusinian mysteries, they never revealed the secret of Eleusis. To this day, the scholars are guessing at it, and we really don't know. But we know the myth, and we know some of the actions that were there, the myth being the combined mythology of the two goddesses, namely the mother Demeter and her daughter, who undergo certain experiences. And somehow it would seem that in addition to what sort of secrets may have been going on, that by identifying with Persephone, the daughter, and Demeter, the mother, somehow by becoming these figures in a mystical and imaginative way, and additional elements that we don't know about, people underwent a great deal of transformation. Now, this is not so unusual and peculiar as it may seem, because, for instance, in our time, certainly in the 20th century, and there, I mean, it was initiated in the 20th century in the discipline of depth psychology. Something very similar was attempted, and it was attempted by not a high priest of Elefsis in Greece, but rather by a pipe-smoking medical doctor by the name of Carl Gustav Jung in Zurich in Switzerland. When he worked on and designed Jungian analysis, it was for the purpose of doing something very similar to what the mysteries were doing, so that people would be guided over a period of time in involving their dreams, involving imaginative experiences, involving all sorts of modalities, shall we say, that would bring about, let's say, better to say, facilitate an interior transformation of their psyche, of their soul, of their mind, of a great magnitude and of a lasting character. Now, I am not a Jungian analyst. I've never been in Jungian analysis myself, so I am sort of, you might say, in a fashion whistling Dixie. But I never was good at whistling, so I'm not going to repeat that. But let us say, nevertheless, I have known a good many people in that field, and I've read a great deal of literature, and I am convinced that this was, and still is, of course, the founding hierophant, no longer being here, Dr. Jung, having deceased in the 60s, but this was, let's say, a great attempt at establishing a discipline that would greatly facilitate it and often actually bring about very powerful internal transformation, which would redound to the benefit of the life of the individual transformed. So let's say even in modern times, even in the 1900s, such activities were going on and were successful. Now, if that happened, let's say in that particular fashion, coming out of Zurich in Switzerland, it also happened in a different way and by different people before. And one of the ways in which, let's say, such a process was practiced, and practiced apparently with considerable success, was in an association of people that came to be called Freemasonry. Interestingly enough, those of you who like languages might be interested in being reminded of the fact that in France it is called Franc-Maçonnerie, which means the Frankish Masonry, because to a Frenchman everything has to be French. And so while active Freemasonry mostly developed initially in England, when it came to France, then it became a Franc-Maçonnerie. But of course it is the same thing. So what even an association of people who came together, had a common understanding of their objectives, had a common, let's say, a common orientation to life already, and who then were instructed to go through certain rituals and the memorizing and recounting of various ritual phrases and actions in a successive manner in several great divisions, which are called degrees, and which were designed to lead to a deeper perception, a more transcendental insight of the personality, and therefore to a spiritually and physically and intellectually more productive life. So it is really, I think, the solution to the question, if there is indeed a question, is very simple. That this was from the, it's very difficult to tell really when on, but probably from about the 1600s on, 17th century on, was a major initiatic effort, group effort, at the elevation and the transformation of the human soul. Now, since I'm a little bit partial, having gone through some of the degrees myself, and I cannot say a great deal about it, but I would say that right down to this day, when engaged in and administered by sincere, well-intentioned and determined people, it can be indeed very effective. And in historical periods when practically nothing else was available, this gradual transformative process of spiritual transformation was of great value and of ultimately great benefit to a good many people. Now, that quite a bit of controversy attached itself to it at various times in different countries is true. Well, you know, I'm tempted to say that the more important, especially in a spiritual sense, your endeavors are in this life, the more opposition and the more controversy you are going to create. A person who never made an enemy, never had an argument with anybody, never had all of those things, just sort of skipped through life in a kind of nature spirit fashion, usually didn't accomplish a that good thing either. In other words, if you're really doing something that has sort of certain oomph to it, if you really got your teeth in a serious project, especially internally, you're going to run into some trouble. If you don't want a life of trouble, then maybe you shouldn't have been born in this world. I don't know. Maybe things are easier. I don't know, Mars or Venus or on the Milky Way. But in this world there is, I would even go further than that, and I have already that I think you to some extent can measure the possible import, the value of what you are doing by the reverberations often of an unpleasant nature that will come your way. Primarily perhaps because, I'm very tempted to say some things, but I won't. But, but let's say people are of limited perception and intelligence in general. People ain't very smart, if you want to use that expression, And as the result of that, they get very annoyed by things that they don't understand, because it brings to their attention how benighted they really are, and therefore they don't like those things. So it's that kind of thing to a large extent that Freemasonry encountered. I don't mean to say that other things may not have been involved. There's a certain period when there was a great deal of conflict between the Roman Catholic Church and Freemasonry, which was largely due to political involvements of various kinds at a certain time, especially in the Latin countries, Italy and Spain and France and so forth. And I'm sure that many of the Masonic brethren were not without some fault in these disputes either, but the essential fact is that this relatively small association of generally educated, diligent, well-intentioned people, men, was an immense cultural force underneath the surface of many countries. And as such, it was an ongoing example of the possibility that exists in human life, that we can grow spiritually, we can be transformed, we can go into the depths and the heights of the psyche step by step, and thereby have a spiritually and intellectually far more active and transformed life than we otherwise might be. Like every activity, there are difficulties, there are mistakes that are being made, and nothing is perfect, but I think this much. I have studied Masonic history and history related to that, and I think that is my judgment. So when Mr. Hall wrote so eloquently and with so much praise about Freemasonry, I think he wrote on this basis, that here is something that has been here at least for a few hundred years, and that really has been a sort of laboratory of transformation, at least that was its intention. In many countries in Western culture, and a very great and helpful force. By the way, there is I always have to mention some, because anything in connection with Manly Palmer Hall, you run into rumors. At least I call them rumors. The PRS, the Philosophical Research Society, and the people who went there to the lecture, this and that, they were all full of rumors about Mr. Hall. And the rumors were never confirmed. So depending who told you the rumor, you might say, this guy maybe he knows something, so maybe this is true, but you never could be sure. A whole bunch of them. If you think of them all at once, it really becomes rather comical. All the things that people dreamt up about Manly Hall. Well, one of the rumors was, also unconfirmed, that Mr. Hall became a Mason rather late in life. He had written already 2 very learned books on Masonry, which were read very avidly by Freemasons, and he wasn't a Freemason himself. At least that was the rumor. But he never. Then, of course, he became an active Freemason. The 33rd degree was conferred on him when I was with him already, and he had a very nice photograph in the regalia of the 33rd degree, including the hat and sash and everything else. And he said to me, actually at that point, he says, well, if it is a sign of my high regard for the Masonic order that I have this picture and show it to anybody, because I don't like to dress up like that. It seemed, well, I said, Mr. Hall, but you look very good. But let's see, he was a very highly regarded and valued member of the Masonic order. When in better days, when San Francisco was still worthy of being visited, which I understand is not the case at the present time, it's even in worse shape than Los Angeles, if that is possible. In any event, I used to go to San Francisco with considerable frequency, and I usually went to the Grand Lodge, up on some kind of a hill, they call it, where all the beautiful old houses are. Yeah. So anyway, so I told the venerable gentlemen there who were guarding the library and so forth that I was associated, that I worked with Mr. Hall. Oh boy, I was immediately put into a different category. Oh, you know, Brother Hall, come on in, have a cup of coffee, whatever the case may be, you know. So, and while he was still well, every year, in the Easter week, I think around Monday, Thursday or so, he went to San Francisco to the Grand Lodge to an Easter celebration of the Masonic order of the Masonic body. Anyway, let's see, what he was telling us is that, you know, the Masonic, that he used the word Masonic as the first description of the tradition that he was referencing. There is something that's still in existence, maybe not always doing what it's supposed to be doing, maybe having some difficulties here and there, but here is something that has for some hundreds of years has been working for the deepening of the human soul, human transformation, and therefore this is an example for us to see how even in modern times the mystery principle can work. That is why he mentioned Freemasonry before, and I certainly agree with him, and you know, I come from one of those countries where from time to time, largely for the religious sources, there was controversy about Masonry, but like my father said once when it was brought up, because we really had, my father was not a Mason, but we in our house in a little city in southern Hungary, only known to my father, who was the landlord, there met once a week a Masonic lodge. And the only time that even we, the family, found out, when in the spring of 44, the German Nazis came, and the Nazis were very opposed to Masonry, because you tend to hate what you don't understand. And they were such an obtuse bunch. In any event, here, you know, so then all of a sudden there was furniture and various things were being moved out of that particular wing of our house, and the plaque that had been there, which said in French, Les Amis de la France, the friends of France, which was the name of the lodge. So my father knew all that, and so somebody said something derogatory about Masonry at the house, and he said, well, I don't know, you know, all the best people in town here belong to it. My lawyer, and the mayor, the man who manages some of our land. So, you know, judging by all of these members, it must be a pretty nice place. and that was really true. So let us say Mr. Hall looked at it from the spiritual angle, and he was quite right. Now comes the second title, Hermetic. Now, here I think we need to include, to a certain extent, a whole compendium of, let's see, mystical associations and their traditions that come from the late Roman period, from the Alexandrian period. Because there were three, you might say, neo-mystery schools, reformed mystery schools that were functioning primarily in and out of the city of Alexandria, the city of Alexander the Great in Egypt. And they were the Neoplatonists, initially led by the mysterious mystic Ammonius Saccas, the Hermetics or Hermeticists as they were called, and my friends the Gnostics. It just so happened, as I mentioned to you, the others had, at least in terms of their mystique and their literature, survived, but the Gnostics didn't, because they were subject to so much persecution in an early period that they had to go underground at an early time. And so what Mr. Hall referred to on the Hermetic is a tradition, a mystical tradition that originated in Egypt, and that, according to Mr. Hall, was actually founded upon and the direct heir, let us say, of the ancient pharaonic Egyptian mystery religions. Because the time that when Hermeticism functioned was after pharaonic Egypt was no longer there, after after the Ptolemies. The last of the Ptolemies was Cleopatra, who, as we all know, was bitten by the snake, by the asp, and then died. So there were no more Ptolemies, a Ptolemaic dynasty. In any event, this was a thoroughly transformative, thoroughly Gnostic, but not Christian, but pagan, let's say, mystery tradition. And its source was attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a combination of the Egyptian god Thoth, you know, the one with the head of the ibis bird, and the Greek Hermes, the wisdom god of the Greeks. You have to recognize that, not really recognize generally, but you have to keep in mind that the spiritual connection and the system of spiritual recognition, shall we say, of Greece, ancient Greece, I mean, and Egypt was very, very close. I think it was Herodotus who wrote, at least where it was found, he said that all the goddesses of Greece were other forms of manifestation of the great Isis. So that their deference to the ancient Egyptian traditions was very, very great, and they felt that their mysteries and their myths and so forth were really very closely related to the Egyptian. Now, we will be here all night, and you will never come back if I don't cut these things a little bit shorter now. But let's say now this was a very important and very popular mystery cult for a number of 100 years, of 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century. And then, just like the Gnostics, it kind of went out of business. But it didn't stay out of business for the following reason, that much, much later, in the, I think it was probably sort of in the Quattrocento, right when the Renaissance was ready to start in Europe, a whole bunch of books were discovered all of a sudden that nobody knew about, and they were known as the Corpus Hermeticum, the Hermetic body of writings, and in them was represented beautiful, poetic, and transformative and helpful mystical philosophy of tremendous power and of tremendous import. And it is to the credit of, in particularly Cosimo the First of the House of Medici, who was one of the great rulers of Italy at that time, that he stopped the activity of all of his scholars, and he said, even the one who was translating Plato at the time, he says, put it away and translate for me the Hermetic books. And that is how the Corpus Hermeticum came and really in many ways caused the Renaissance. There's no doubt about it. There was a spiritual impulse coming from these writings which are Greek, but the spirit of which goes back to Egypt, and which were, shall we say, very, very different from the Orthodox Christianity of the Middle Ages, which all of a sudden burst upon Western culture, and it brought about a religious and cultural change of tremendous magnitude. Of course, where good things are trying to happen, usually something also happens to stop them. And largely what stopped the Hermetic Renaissance at a certain point, we never stopped it completely, the books were available, people were reading it, it was never declared heretical, but what sort of stopped the spread of it was the Reformation. Martin Luther, and especially the dreadful and dreaded John Calvin, the horrible man. In any event, that kind of toned it down. But there were serious discussions at the Vatican. There was a cardinal, very important cardinal, advocated that the Hermetic books, like the Poimandres and others, should be included in the canon of the Church. So we almost ended up with them in the Christian Bible. Now, wouldn't that be interesting? Well, it didn't. It didn't happen. So it wasn't interesting. But all these things were there. I don't know. In any event, this also became a very important influence on the spiritual culture of the West, and remained as such. And the Hermetic books and their mystical message was always there, it was available, and it was not condemned by the Church. I have a little theory which I thought I would spring on you tonight, but I'm not going to spring it. So keep in mind that I have a secret. And that somewhere in the course of the next few weeks or months, it shall be revealed. But I'm not going to do it now. But it joins with this situation that the Egyptian influence, the ancient Egyptian influence, which the scholars really know is immense in all kinds of things. Our alphabet, our sciences, all of that has a connection with ancient Egypt, for which reason a Victorian scholar, English of some import, whose name will come to me, wrote a book, two-volume big book called Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World. And it really was. And the Hermetic tradition is a direct descendant of that. One of my principal teachers, Dr. Alvin Boyd Kuhn of blessed memory, had the same. He was very much a follower of that, and he felt that the ancient Egyptian influence never ceased. He said it never ceased, and it is still here. Only, of course, in a sort of, if I say so, in a rebaptized manner sometimes, but it is still here. In any event, let's say the Hermetic tradition obviously is very, very important. So but I got to throw that in, otherwise I will be very inaccurate. The first big Hermetic Renaissance was in the Renaissance, obviously. Quattrocento, Quinquecento, and all that back there, where all the great artists had great creativity, really marvelous period, but it wasn't the only one. But that was the best one, I think. I would have loved to have lived at the time of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and all of these people. Although, I tell you, even then, if you didn't watch yourself, you just as easily got knifed in the cities of Rome as you get knifed in the slummy parts of our country at the present time. Rome was full of criminality, while the most magnificent architecture and art was being practiced. So there is a shadow side to every period. In any event, time went on. The Renaissance kind of died down because of the Reformation, and then along came sort of the second Hermetic revival, and that came largely out of France. And who were the people involved in that? Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Diderot, D'Alembert, in a minor way the German poets and philosophers, Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Friedrich Schiller, all of these people, because they rediscovered and they recycled the Hermetic spirit into European culture. And that was the origin of science, that was the origin of rationalism. It was also the origin of the thinking of people like Benjamin Franklin and the founders of the American Republic, people like that. This all was the result of what has been justly called the spirit of the Enlightenment, which had Hermetic origins. So the Hermetic spirit came back. Oh yes, they all swore on the Bible when they went to court or things like that. But in a Hermetic spirit, well, sure, there is truth in the Bible, there is truth in all the religious scriptures. You don't have to be against it. But let's say it gave a completely new impulse to Western culture. And as I hope to indicate next month, that impulse had a tremendous amount to do with the founding and the continuation after the founding of the American Republic. This was founded as the Hermetic state, the rebirth of the society envisioned mythologically by Hermes Trismegistus, even though it was called a Christian country. And I'll tell you all about that next month. How do you like that? What a promise. In any event, that was let's say, the second Hermetic Renaissance. So the Hermetic spirit had agreed also. It worked into the discovery and the continuity of alchemy, which was of very great importance. So obviously Mr. Hall would mention that as one of the important sources. Now, the other two I think we can deal with more quickly. Kabbalistic. Well, here of course we have the mystical system of Israel. Gershon Scholem, who was really the great discoverer of Jewish mysticism in modern times, a great and fabulous scholar, has called the Kabbalah Jewish Gnosticism. So that by then, of course, he knew all about it. So the great Kabbalistic spiritual impulse broke out of its Jewish containment in the 19th century with such figures as Eliphas Levi, who became a tremendous influence on esoteric culture, and such figures, leading figures of the occult renaissance of the late 19th century, as Madame Blavatsky, as the great Masonic scholar and leader Albert Pike, of whom Mr. Manley Hall also wrote greatly. All of these had a very strong connection with the discovery of the Kabbalah by the French scholar and mystic Eliphas Levi, and so the Kabbalah came out of the open in the 19th century and became really one of the principal focal points, shall we say, of of the occult renaissance of the late 19th and the early 20th century. And you've got to remember the Theosophical Society with Madame Blavatsky was founded in 1875, which was here in New York City, which was the year that Eliphas Levi died. It was also the year that Carl Gustav Jung was born. And another person whom I rather not mention at this point, kind of a jesterish person of the occult world. Well, I'll mention his name. He was really quite a merry fellow, Aleister Crowley. He was also born in 1875. In any event, there was another real rebirth, and a very important one. And as to the Rosicrucian, which is the last thing that Mr. Hall mentioned, I'll only mention a little incident. I think it was one of Mr. Hall's birthday parties in March that we always celebrated in the library, and we always had a very large and very good cake, I must say, for which those of us who remember, there's probably nobody around who remembers, but anyway, I do remember that sat very well with us, that cake. And Mr. Hall liked sweets. He was not a vegetarian, he was not a teetotaler, he was not opposed to tobacco, and he did all of those things in a pleasant manner and in moderation. In fact, he was fond of the joke that all things in moderation, including moderation. In any event, so somebody asked in the private setting as to what kind of a religion are we? I mean, those of us who are here with Mr. Hall and so on. He grew very serious, and he said, "We are Christians of an esoteric orientation," he said, "and I consider myself a Rosicrucian Christian." Those very words, there they were, not anything else. And I always considered that to have been very courageous, very forthright, and also really very profound, because in that confession, in that recognition, I think lies a great deal of recognition. All right, now, we went through these various steps out of the great book, and what kind of summation can we give? Well, I think we can. It's a little bit difficult, because I think that Mr. Hall's Mr. Hall's heritage, his legacy, was a way in which the ancient initiatic esoteric tradition could be made available and useful to anybody who wished to avail himself of it. In other words, reading and to trying to understand Eliphas Levi, well, go ahead and try it sometime. It's really difficult. And similar situations. To read and to understand the entirety of the several volumes of Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, well, I tried it, let me tell you, you're not going to succeed. It's a very, very interesting book, but so the issue is that even the revivers of the modern esoteric tradition were, let's say, difficult to deal with and difficult to understand, complex in all of that. And then the movements that took off from them, such as the Theosophical Society, of which I have been a member for decades upon decades upon decades, and I still am, they all, let's say, they became belief systems. I always was unhappy about that, not entirely, But Mr. Hall was of the view, and he voiced it several times, that ultimately what we are here to do is not to believe, but to know. And he was trying to convey the intellectually and in various other ways, he was trying to convey the need for, and to some extent the ways of such knowledge to all people who were thus desirous. So I would say he wanted to be, and he was, every man's esotericist. You didn't have to come from the university, you didn't have to come from the ashram of a guru, you didn't have to come from the Tibetan temple, you could come from El Monte or some other great metropolis in our area. Wherever you came from, he was speaking to you. And he gave you something that you could use, and that would be conducive over a period of time if you came back to it, if you worked at it, if you considered it serious, that it was conducive to your own spiritual transformation. He was the only one, and he was the greatest of them all. Now, that was my feeling about him every time we were there on Sunday at the PRS and so forth. Here he is conveying these extremely profound and often tremendously inspiring things. He's conveying them to everybody. He says, if you take these things to heart, you are going to grow spiritually, you're going to be transformed spiritually, and you'll lead a good life. And he did. And I had, as I say, I have been what is it now? Probably about 70 years or so a member of the Theosophical Society, and I valued it very greatly, and I valued my friends there very greatly, and I still do, but let us say, Manly Hall's approach to the esoteric was very unique. It was a combination of great profundity and at the same time a great availability. Yeah. You didn't have to be a vegetarian, you didn't have to read 15 books, whatever, and you could understand him. And if you were so disposed, then you could follow the consequences of what he thought. There is only one more thing that I'm going to throw in the end, and this is an endless process, because his contribution was like an endless cornucopia. I mean, that's how you felt when you came out of that originally the old campus theater on a Sunday morning, and later on when we had the auditorium at the PRS, you came out of there, man. I didn't know that such things existed, and that's really true. I mean, that is what he did. But there is one caveat which I want to mention, and on that I'll conclude. He was very much of the view that this transformation of the individual human soul in our culture could be accomplished very largely only if there was a foundation. And that foundation would be the ethic of the Judeo-Christian spiritual background of our culture. And he was very concerned about the atheist and secularist trends which were rising already in these various deflections. He said, if there is no God, then what we are doing is for nothing. It's in vain. You can talk about reincarnation, you can talk about this, that, and the other thing, you can talk about magic and so forth, but if there is not, as C.G. Jung called it, a higher power, then why are we doing all of these things? You know? Why aren't we down at, if there is one, and why aren't we down at the neighborhood saloon and drink Johnny Walker Red instead, you know? The only reason why these studies, these endeavors, these exercises, these prayers, these meditations, now I am using these words, make any sense is because there is a higher power. When these two gentlemen, I don't know their names now, who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, when they went to C.G. Jung and they presented to him the, I don't know how many points, you know, their program of, Jung looked over and he said, yeah, you know, alcoholism is a very serious neurosis and so forth, but he said to them, you know, there's something missing here. If you don't put that in, you're not going to succeed. And what was that? You have to refer to the higher power. And they put it in. You see? Now, again, look, Manly Hall or I or C.G. Jung, not telling you that you have to believe in and worship a God with a great big beard who, I don't know, who hands throws stone tablets off a mountain or something like that, you know. That's not the issue. It's not a biblical Christianity or a biblical Orthodox Judaism or anything, but there has to be a conviction regarding something higher and deeper and better and holier than what we encounter on this earth. If there is no such thing, then we can't aspire to it, and then we might as well give up. And this is so there has to be, you might say, a metaphysical foundation of all esoteric study, which has to be there. And this is at least my great anxiety at the present time, that I see that that metaphysical foundation eroding rapidly in the culture, and that even in the circles that, I am not religious, but I am spiritual, and these things, excuses. I don't care what you call it, but you have to refer to, and you have to try to make contact with, and you have to follow the dictates in your own soul of a higher power. If that doesn't happen, nothing happens. That is the foundation upon which everything else has to be built. And Mr. Hall was able to build on it because he still lived and was lecturing in a period where this was understood. If you had taken a toll on an average Sunday and asked the people who were there, how many of you believe in God? As all the hands would have gone up. All of them would have gone up. If you did the same thing now, nothing would go up. Or very little. And this is a problem. So let's say the foundational background on which people like Manly Hall, and it was greatly unique, worked, has to be there. There has to be a foundation. There has to be a foundation of a reliance on a higher power, and the willingness to refer our little human self to a higher power. And if that doesn't return, I don't have much hope for our culture. But I think that hope is eternal, and certainly Mr. Hall would be upset if we said that we have no hope. Yes, we have hope. And I think that the hope is because what we are talking about here, and what at least I am desiring, has always been there in humanity. It's like nature. The Latin saying, naturam expellas furcata menusque recurret. Now you translate it for me. You can chase out nature with a pitchfork, but she will come right back. You can chase out the divine with a pitchfork. You can kick out God one door, come back the other one. So that therefore, let's say, if the higher power is really powerful, then it will be powerful enough to come back, and will not let a bunch of dingbats kick it out of the culture. But there is a danger, and we have to be careful, and we should recognize that what we are really dealing with is the moving closer and closer to the transcendental, to the divine, to that which has always been and always was and will be, and while moving closer to it, we will be ourselves transformed and come to the recognition that at least an element or portion of that divinity has been in us all along. Because the real faith in God is the faith, among others, is the faith of the God in us. But the two are interdependent, you see. The two are dependent on each other. We have to have both. And so I think the legacy of Mr. Hall is the striving for transcendence and our ability to reach it and to do something with it, and availing ourselves of the help and the sources that have been given to us throughout the ages. And with all of this help, we will achieve the goalless goal, the end point of the endless, the glory of the glory, the God of the divine. We will, because we are part of it, and we have the duty as well as the right to reach out for it. Not for the computer screen, not for the politics, not for all the balderdash that goes on in this society and all the fear-mongering, but reaching for that which is beyond the visible, beyond this world, beyond everything else, that has always been with us, that has brought us here, and that with its own power and might and with our own cooperation is going to take us unto itself. And won't that be a great day? Won't that be a marvelous time? Won't that be happiness? You look for safety in this miserable, unsafe world. There is only one safety, it's the safety of the Spirit, the safety of the divine. Everything else is inferior. And now I am talking, as Mr. Hall would say, come on, Dr. Hell, just cool it a little bit. But it's... It is the only real thing. And if we move to the real, then we are fine. But otherwise, we will stumble around among unreal things which will disappoint us over and over again. They don't give us any wisdom, they don't give us any security, they don't give us anything. But it can be done. And people like Manly Hall have tried to help us to do it. I know he has. I was there. I saw him do it. I heard him do it. I felt him do it. And therefore, we can do likewise. And if we do likewise, then everything, all shall be well, as the British mystic said, and all manner of things shall be well. Manly Hall is a challenge to us, to do and to understand what he did and what he understood, and to incorporate it into our own transformed selfhood. And I assure you, if even to a smallest degree we can do that, then everything will be marvelous. Everything will be a marvel, everything will be a miracle. Without it, not so much. So the choice is ours, but he gave us the material to choose. And for this, if I should live another 90 years, if I should have to come back into this misery, even by way of reincarnation. No matter what happens, I will always be grateful, I will eternally be grateful that I was there and that I was able to be with that man and to receive from it as much as I was able to take, which has carried me up to this point in my life and will carry me as long as the Divine wills it. So once again, while he is not with us still, long live Manly Palmer Hall, long live Manly Palmer Hall.